worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. Hurry, as lines close on Friday. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. As the Houses of Commons and Lords vote on Rwanda legislation, a big speech by Rishi Sunak where he says, no ifs, no buts, the planes are going to Rwanda, no foreign court will stop us. I wonder, has a summer general election just got a little bit closer? A catastrophic loss of confidence in our police forces. I wonder, maybe, if they started treating shoplifting as a crime again, whether that might change. And a surge in companies complaining about being debanked to the financial ombudsman. All of this on the eve of the first NatWest AGM since the great Nigel Farage scandal. All of that and much more after the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Nigel, thanks very much and good evening from the GB Newsroom. Well, first, an update on the latest developments in Westminster, where MPs have voted to reject two amendments from the House of Lords on the Rwanda bill. Well, it means the bill now returns to the House of Lords tonight, where peers are expected to vote for new amendments before sending the bill back to the Commons. It's been reported the political ping-pong could continue into the night, with both MPs and peers poised for a long session of voting. It comes after Rishi Sunak declared earlier that enough is enough and said MPs and peers will sit through the night to get the bill passed. Well, to the US now, and prosecutors have told a court that Donald Trump's alleged cover-up of a hush money payment to a porn star did break the law. Sparse crowds greeted Trump at the New York courthouse despite his call for peaceful nationwide protests. It's the first ever criminal trial of a former US president and comes amid Trump's election rematch with Biden. Prosecutors argue his $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels deceived voters during the presidential campaign in 2016. Donald Trump denies any wrongdoing.
The judge had no idea what was happening. And this is the same judge that 2 months ago made a ruling that shook the world. It shook the world because everyone knows going to that trial I did nothing wrong. And over here, I did nothing wrong also. This is a Biden witch hunt to keep me off the campaign trail. So far, it's not working because my poll numbers are higher than they've ever been because the public understands that it's a witch hunt.
An anti-Semitism campaigner who was threatened with arrest at a pro-Palestine rally has told GB News the chief of the Met Police should resign. Gideon Falter, who is the chief executive of the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, was described as openly Jewish by officers and told his presence at a pro-Palestine demonstration was provocative. Mr Falter says the Home Secretary should remove Sir Mark Rowley from his post.
The Met Police Commissioner has failed to use his powers to curtail or ban these protests. And now we've got a situation where, very regrettably, we are seeing the Met Commissioner has failed completely, and change has to come from the top. So what I'd really like the Home Secretary to be saying to the Commissioner today is resign or you're fired.
A former parliamentary researcher and another man have been charged with spying for China after an investigation by counter-terrorism police. 29-year-old Christopher Cash and Christopher Berry, who's 32, have been charged under the Official Secrets Act. Both have been bailed and will appear at Westminster Magistrates Court on Friday. The Metropolitan Police say the allegations are very serious. And Hugh Edwards has resigned from his position at the BBC. The news presenter was the broadcaster's highest paid star, but he's been off air since last July amid newspaper reports that he paid someone for intimate images. His departure comes after what the BBC described as medical advice. Well, for the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Just scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, though, it's back to Nigel.
That game of parliamentary ping-pong is happening once again. Yes, the House of Commons and the House of Lords voting. The next big vote, I believe, in the House of Lords at 10 o'clock this evening. And the House of Commons will then vote 2 hours later. Will the peers back down? Will they do, as the elected House by a very clear majority wants? Well, that remains to be seen. Those of you that watch this show regularly will know I did pretty much predict the House of Lords would make this as difficult as they possibly could. So nothing on that is very surprising. But I'll tell you what was surprising. And that was the speech today by Rishi Sunak, standing behind the lectern with "Stop the Boats" on it. And bear in mind, it's now more than 2 years since Boris Johnson went to Lydd Airport in Kent and unveiled the Rwanda plan. So far, we've spent over 150 million quid and not a single person has gone. But just have a listen to what Rishi Sunak said this morning and to his tone.
I can confirm that we've put an airfield on standby, booked commercial charter planes for specific slots, and we have 500 highly trained individuals ready to escort illegal migrants all the way to Rwanda, with 300 more trained in the coming weeks. This is one of the most complex operational endeavours the Home Office has carried out. But we are ready. Plans are in place. And these flights will go come what may. No foreign court will stop us from getting flights off.
Did you hear that? No foreign court will stop us from getting these flights off, as indeed the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg did last time round. Now, that is a very bold statement for a British Prime Minister to make. He's basically saying, whatever is said by that court in Strasbourg, we are simply going to ignore it. But he knows that half his own party, certainly half his own MPs, would be appalled by that because they think the European Court of Human Rights is a good thing. What he didn't tell you is even if we were to ignore the European Court of Human Rights, which I believe to be very, very unlikely indeed, we'd still have something called the Human Rights Act of 1998, which incorporated the very convention that is used by that court in Strasbourg into British law, which would be used by British judges. This idea that those planes are going to Rwanda in 10 to 12 weeks' time, come what may. Folks, believe me, it isn't going to happen. And I've been right about this consistently for the last 4 years. Sorry to sound a bit big-headed, but literally I have been right about this. I predicted the crisis. I've said all the way through Rwanda wouldn't work. And because of that, I've rather changed my view today on something quite significant. if you'd asked me first thing this morning before that speech whether there would be a summer general election, not an autumn general election, I'd have said, well, I reckon it's 2/3 on it being an autumn election, 1/3 on it being a summer election. I have now shifted my view today, particularly given the words that Sunak used, no foreign court will stop these planes from leaving. I would now say it's 2/3 likely that we're going to have a general election at the end of June or early July. However, well or badly, the Conservatives may do in the elections coming up next week on the 2nd of May. And bear in mind, we've got some big mayoral elections. We've got London, we've got the West Midlands, and indeed we've got Tees Valley as well, which is pretty big stuff for both parties, frankly. Now, the reason I think there's going to be an early election is because you can't keep upping the ante on stopping the boats and sending people to Rwanda and keep failing. He must know, his advisers must know, that all the while the Human Rights Act is there in law, there'll be lawyers on behalf of people who are going to be deported, who will go to the courts and British judges will find in their favour and not allow them to go to Rwanda. So rather than wait for what is seen to be his flagship policy to disintegrate, he'll call a general election before it, making promises that he can't deliver. That's my thought. You tell me. Will there be an early election? Farage at gbnews.com. Let's get to the Palace of Westminster and that ongoing game of ping pong. I'm joined by Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor. What news from the Palace?
No news yet since those votes about just over an hour ago or so, Nigel, when we saw, of course, the House of Commons sent back those 2 amendments to the House of Lords. These are 2 attempts to weaken the Safety of Rwanda bill, trying to bring in a new rule that Rwanda must be pronounced safe, regularly called a safe country, and also stopping the risk of any Afghans who arrive here illegally being flown to Rwanda if they have seen military service with the UK forces in Afghanistan. Those are both back with the Lords and they're voting at 10 p.m. tonight. I can reveal to you that the PM, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, is hosting drinks with his backbenchers in the office of the Chief Whip at 9:30 p.m. tonight. That's to try and get them all going, get them all galvanised for what could be a late night. We think if the Lords don't fold at 10, we could be back at midnight for votes in the House of Commons to try and put it back into the Lords' camp. How many crossbenchers are still standing, wanting to vote by that point? We'll wait and see. That'll be a 2 a.m. reversal. And some think it might hang over into tomorrow. There's time booked in the House of Commons timetable for tomorrow, and that could even risk delaying a trip to Poland and Germany by the Prime Minister if that happens. So it could be quite a dramatic night, certainly the most dramatic since 2005, when there were 5 iterations of the so-called ping-pong process over anti-terrorism laws. It could have been avoided this, I think, if the PM had pushed harder for these votes before the Easter recess. There were 3 or 4 days there that he could have used and he didn't. I think you're right there, your central point there, saying he said that no foreign court will stop us from getting flights off. No one here, no Tories I'm speaking to, and of course they're the ones who would know, are saying they want an early election. At least 2 of them said tonight they want 6 months more pay, Nigel. By holding out until November, they get paid for longer than losing their seats in July, which you might enjoy. But that was what 2 of them told me tonight. And indeed, the other big thing you're missing out, maybe, is that people in the Tory side are waiting for something else to happen. You know, there's going to be probably, as I've been saying for a few months now, there'll be a budget in September. There'll be more tax cuts promised for after the election. So the promise is vote for us and get these tax cuts in September. And you know how time and politics can change so quickly. If you had 5 or 6 months to wait, why not wait that longer? And also, you're missing out on the very point, Nigel, that Rishi Sunak, his 2-year anniversary as Prime Minister is up in October. Now, rather than be Prime Minister for 18 months, if you can say I've been in charge for 2 years, that has more meaning to it. I mean, these people in Downing Street, Nigel, are writing the first line of their obituary all the time. The most important job he'll ever have is being Prime Minister. So why give it up so quickly when you don't have to? And if he goes early, just finally, and they go to a big defeat, as the polls suggest, it's all his fault. The party will not forgive him for not holding out for what might happen. And for all those reasons, I'm still banking on a November election.
Chris, I get the logic of every single point that you've made. I just feel that if your flagship policy, if you've upped the ante as high as he has today, when you know in the back of your mind the Human Rights Act can be used against you, that would lead to utter humiliation. All I'm saying is the balance of probabilities shifted today with the upping of the ante. Chris, you're in for a very, very long evening, and viewers, you can catch Chris Hope live up until midnight and maybe later than that. Thank you very much indeed. I'm joined by Dr. Mike Jones, Executive Director of Migration Watch UK. Well, we've had David Cameron, we've had Theresa May, we've had Boris Johnson saying if you come to Britain illegally, you won't be allowed to stay. We then got the big speech just over 2 years ago at Lyd Airport from Boris. This was the strongest rhetoric yet, wasn't it?
It is, that's correct, but there's always a gap between rhetoric and reality in migration politics. Not just in the UK, but also in the US and Western Europe. Politicians talk a good game, but they deliver very poor results that are out of sync with the British public. This is just another classic case study. The number of migrants crossing the Channel illegally this year is higher than it was last year.
No mention of that.
Of course not. We're very close to 2022 numbers, which was the highest year on record in terms of numbers. So clearly the Stop the Boats policy isn't working. And as you say, the root cause of this is the Human Rights Act and the legal architecture that we have.
We focused so much on ECHR because it was an unnamed judge at 10 o'clock at night that stopped that flight going to Rwanda. But the Human Rights Act is potentially a massive problem, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, we were members of the Strasbourg Court, the European Court of Human Rights, long before we had the Human Rights Act.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, if you look at the number of cases issued against the UK by the Strasbourg Court, they've gone down year after year since the introduction of the Human Rights Act. Now ask yourself, why is that? That's because domestic courts are just as zealous.
Yeah, we don't need them anymore. We don't need Strasbourg anymore because our own judges are working off the same rule book effectively.
Absolutely. And it's the thing is, constitutionally, you can ignore the judgments of international courts because of the principle of parliamentary sovereignty, but you cannot ignore domestic courts because then the Home Secretary would be in contempt of court.
So is the Human Rights Act, in a sense, the absolute nub of this problem when it comes to deporting people?
It's the root cause, yeah. I mean, there are issues with the Strasbourg Court. Don't get me wrong. There are particular arguments regarding its case law, the interference of international courts and so on. But the Human Rights Act is absolutely fundamental to this. It's the root cause of the problem. And the Tories have tried to circumnavigate around it. They've introduced, sticking plaster after sticking plaster, legislation after legislation, but they didn't listen to people like Dominic Raab, for example. They should have got to the root cause and they didn't.
And in the view of Migration Watch, will those planes be taking off this summer?
Maybe, but let's just say hypothetically, some of them did. The numbers are going to be very small, and people aren't talking about this because this is on the request of Kigali, the Rwandan government. They only want a few hundred removed and deported in the first few months because they want a bedding in period. So
we deport 50 one day, and it's a nice day in June or July, and 500 come the next day.
Yeah, I mean, the Times report the numbers could be as low as 200 for the first 2 months. That's not going to act as a deterrent, and of course the election will be done and dusted by then.
Which is one of the reasons I think it could be early, not late, but who knows? I could be wrong. Mike, as ever, thank you very much indeed. And the idea that a couple of members of Parliament, Conservative members of Parliament, say to Christopher Hope they want it to go on to the autumn because they want 6 months more pay. What a bunch of weasels. What about the national interest? Never mind. In a moment, we discuss a really quite dramatic fall in our confidence in the police. But then, when activities like shoplifting have effectively become decriminalised, is it any surprise?
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
TfL bosses have come under fire after banning an advert... Oh, God. They've banned an advert for a comedy show because it had a hot dog on it, because that supposedly promotes obesity.
The comedian Ed Gamble has swapped the image of the fast food favourite in favour of a cucumber instead. And there's the cucumber on the plate.
So is the UK turning into a nanny state? Let's talk to former presenter of Fat Families, Steve Miller, and nutritionist Olivia Parry. Good to see you both this morning. Olivia, it's a comedy show. He's not promoting eating hot dogs, is he? Is this just a load of nonsense?
The thing is, we have a huge problem with overweight and obesity in this country. We're fourth in Europe. It's big business. Advertising for food companies is big business. They make so much money. You just have to switch on primetime TV to watch, food after food advertisements. And it's for the youngsters as well, who don't have the nutritional education. We're not taught cookery in school anymore. People go to college and to university, they don't know how to cook.
But
and it leads
forgive me for jumping in, Olivia. Forgive me for jumping in, but the whole point with this is it's an advert for a comedy show.
Yes, I know, but this is a wider issue.
I think it's a load of old tosh, to be quite honest with you. It's a hot dog. In fact, I wish they'd have put onions on the hot dog. A bit of what you fancy won't hurt you. You should eat 80-20 anyway. We talk about a nanny state. I actually think, arguably, we're becoming an authoritarian state. Opinions banned. Comedy banned. The England flag banned. It's like we've got to wear a virtual muzzle.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We keep being told that crime is falling, but that's not the perception of many of us. And our support and confidence in the police force is falling pretty quickly. Only about a third of us really now have confidence in the police, and crimes like shoplifting have literally doubled over the course of the last year. But in London in particular, some of the statistics out in a survey today are really, really alarming, and I'm pleased to be joined by Nikita Malik, who works for the Centre for Social Justice, the think tank that have produced this evidence. Nikita, thank you for joining me on the programme. I was really, really stunned, actually, that your polling revealed that 1 in 4 Londoners had been attacked or threatened with violence in the last 5 years. That is an astonishing figure.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what's interesting here is, as you said in the beginning of this segment, the perception versus the numbers. So while we see that the numbers of knife crime offences have decreased over the last 5 years, we have to keep in mind there was a pandemic, so people weren't leaving their homes. And that's not really a result of any policy by the London mayor that's causing knife crime to go down. And after that, it's been going up. And most crimes, low-level crimes, aren't even reported to the police.
Isn't that the point?
Exactly.
Isn't that the point? That so much crime now doesn't get reported. What's the point? All this will do is damage my insurance premium or whatever it is. So it's tough to get a real handle on what the crime figures truly are.
Absolutely. And it's also the idea that people feel that justice won't be done. So even if I report the crime, either I don't trust the police or there's a court backlog, so there won't be anything. So it's better just to get on with it. But what really stands out in our figures today is people are being threatened and, they're scared. They're being involved in very difficult situations. And 1 in 4 Londoners being threatened or attacked by violence is simply appalling in the last 5 years.
And as you say, that includes the lockdown period. So actually the figures are worse than they look because of a considerable period of time when nobody was about. And where is this happening? Is it happening on public transport? Is it happening in the street? Where are the areas where Londoners are feeling these threats?
We didn't actually break that down, to be honest. I think that's a very good question as to, where are people and what kinds of crimes are being committed. We asked a more general question about serious violence. But, we very much know that crime is a huge concern nationally. At the Centre for Social Justice, we have over 700 charities across the nation. And the people who work in these charities and the polling that we've done across the nation has also shown that the number one concern in this country nationally for people is crime. So it's not just a London issue, it's a national issue, and it doesn't seem to be not even going away, but getting better in any way.
These London statistics highlight a problem that is national, more acute in London for fairly obvious reasons. Shoplifting, I mentioned shoplifting a couple of times already. It looks like the figures, the estimated figures, have doubled over the course of the last year. And we're almost being told now that unless you nick more than 200 quid's worth, it's not really a crime. I mean, what on earth's going on?
So I think these are particularly what is classified as low-level crimes. So we examined serious violence and high-level crimes, things like knife crimes and homicides. Those are going up. This, I believe, comes from the YouGov polling today, which shows things like shoplifting. The fact of the matter is, if people feel that they can get away with a crime, and there are no consequences for their actions, why not? Why not try to do it? And with things like shoplifting in particular, that's decimating the shops on the streets. There've already been massive repercussions from COVID, and to keep retail shops on the streets, and they have to pay for their own private insurance and their security, and, the police aren't doing anything about it. It's just asking a lot for some of these shops to continue operating the way that they do.
And I go into the supermarket to buy some razor blades, and they're wrapped in some, and the person on the counter's got to get some big machines, and I think, God, I must just order it online.
Exactly. And kind of to bring back to the research that we did at the Centre for Social Justice, this is another big issue. You mentioned razor blades, but it's becoming increasingly easy for people to order dangerous weapons, not razor blades, I'm talking about knives and more dangerous weapons online than they ever could. And when the government's pushing for things like the Online Safety Act to be covering some of this, it's just easier than ever to be able to find this, not just in shops, but online, and people can get away with carrying it.
Which leads me on to the last point I wanted to discuss, which I thought was very interesting in your figures, and that is public support for stop and search. We're always told stop and search, very controversial. If it happens in an area of high immigration, the police are accused of racism, so the police adopt a hands-off approach. Yet your polling showing most people think it's rather a good idea.
Yes, our polling shows that most people support stop and search. And the interesting thing about the polling is, regardless of which ethnic group, they will support stop and search. And this is really the issue about kind of being away from the heart of the issue. People who are dealing with violence every day, who have children who are at risk of picking up knives and being involved in gang violence, want the police to be more involved in the street.
And a majority of young people.
Exactly, more young people than we... Precisely, and I think there has been a very, we say a lot of things about the police, but there's actually been a very strong effort on their part to use stop and search effectively, to educate people on stop and search. And when people are involved in crime and they're in the heart of this gang violence and their children are at risk of being involved in it, they really want the police to do anything they can to stop them from committing crime. Because prevention is easier than cure. If we can prevent a young person from doing this, it's much easier than trying to get them out of the system once they're in jail.
So for stop and search in London, for argument's sake, that would need the Met and the Mayor to be working together.
Absolutely, and one can argue, are they? Because, as we've seen, the crime figures are higher than ever. They've said that stop and search, numbers have been cut, but it's a very effective tool to prevent violence if used correctly. And I question whether the lobbying that has been done by certain groups, including the Mayor of London, to criticise stop and search has really been effective, considering the numbers that we've seen today.
Nikita, I certainly support stop and search. It makes every sense. Thank you. Fascinating figures, but a little bit depressing, folks, isn't it? And hard to believe. 1 in 4 people in London have been the victims of either violence or threats of violence in the last 5 years. No wonder a lot of people, particularly those with young kids, are looking to leave London. Donald Trump's full trial is taking place right now. Yeah, the jury's in place. The arguments are now being heard. We're going to get a full brief direct from New York after the break.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Looking ahead to tomorrow, it's going to be a much drier and sunnier day for many of us, but there will be some rain, particularly across the southeast. That's due to this weather front that's still making its way southwards. Much of the rain will tend to fade away throughout this evening, but there'll be a real legacy of cloud left behind. So quite a murky evening for central areas of England, parts of Wales, the south coast as well. We can see some drizzly rain for a time this evening. There's also a risk of some fog developing across parts of northeastern England through tonight. Further north and west, though, it will be much drier and clearer tonight. It's going to be quite a cold start tomorrow, but frost will be fairly limited to just some Scottish glens and perhaps the far southeast of England as well. So a chillier start to the day, but definitely a brighter start to the day for Northern Ireland, much of Scotland, Northern England as well. Across many western areas of Wales and southwest England as well, it should be a fairly dry and bright day. But sunshine will be a little bit more limited across the south coast, where there'll be some drizzly rain on and off through the day across the southeast. But it won't feel too bad in the sunshine if you're sheltered from that northerly wind. It's going to be a cold start on Wednesday, though. There's a greater risk of seeing a frost, generally, though, still in rural areas. We've got more of a northeasterly wind developing on Wednesday. That will bring in a few showers across the east coast, but in the west, it's going to be another fairly dry, bright and warm-feeling day in the sunshine. Looking ahead to the rest of the week, well, still some chilly nights to come, and it looks like it will turn a little bit more unsettled from Friday.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people. To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Donald Trump appearing today in that New York courthouse. This is now the trial proper. Here he was, arriving just a few hours ago.
All right, thank you very much. I just want to say before we begin, these are all Biden trials. This is done as election interference. Everybody knows it. I'm here instead of being able to be in Pennsylvania and Georgia and lots of other places campaigning. And it's very unfair. Fortunately, the poll numbers are very good. They've been going up because people understand what's going on. This is a witch hunt, and it's a shame. And it comes out of Washington. It's in coordination with Washington, everything, including the DA's office. It's in coordination with Washington. I just want people to understand that this is done for purposes of hurting the opponent of the worst president in the history of our country.
Well, a very angry Donald Trump. But let's try and cut through the noise. Let's find out what is really going on, and let's find out legally what actually matters. And joining me live down the line from Georgia is Shondell Summer, defence attorney at Summer Law Firm. Shondell, we're looking from across the other side of the pond. We can't quite get our heads around what is really going on here. So please explain. It's the trial proper today, both sides putting briefly their cases. What is actually at stake here, and what is Trump accused of doing?
Donald Trump is accused of miscoding or basically falsifying business records to hide and conceal hush money payments to a woman named Stormy Daniels, another woman, and also a doorman at his New York penthouse. the reason this is important is because of the fact that the underlying conduct is a felony. They're claiming that he tried to conceal these payments and was in violation of campaign finance laws in the United States. So if you can show that you put a business entry into your books that was false and it was to hide conduct which was illegal or to conceal conduct which was a felony, then you can be prosecuted for a felony. The penalties for what he's facing.
So one act, the act of itself isn't that serious. But if
That's
the
right,
act,
it's a misdemeanor.
It's a misdemeanor, but then what the prosecution are trying to do is to say, but no, that links into the conduct of the election as well. It sounds a bit of a stretch.
Well, the problem with the prosecution's case is that they have not indicted him for the underlying felony of a campaign finance violation. And other government authorities, the federal government versus the state government, have passed on that opportunity to charge him with the underlying trying to conceal the records in violation of campaign finance laws. And this is an interesting case because a few years ago, there was a candidate for vice president named John Edwards who had, what we call in the United States, a baby mama that he impregnated during the campaign, and he was paying her payments during the campaign. And he was prosecuted for doing that, and he was found not guilty. So there is precedence to show that if you are paying someone money, hush money, and it's for a personal reason, you're trying to preserve your marriage or something to that effect, then it is not necessarily a campaign finance violation. And it was sort of incidental to the fact that he was running for vice president. So Donald Trump is going to avail himself of that same theory.
Okay,
that he was doing his marriage rather than...
That's very, very interesting. And this, of course, is being heard before a jury. I don't know how many people they had to go through to get the jury and how you can find anybody. It's rather like the O.J. Simpson trial all those years ago. How do you find anybody to go onto a jury who has a neutral opinion about Donald Trump as a person?
True that. Certainly they had struggles picking the jury, but they did it very quickly, I thought, relatively speaking. They're not necessarily looking for people who like him or don't like him, although if you had very strong feelings, you were probably dismissed for cause. They just want someone who can be fair. And I thought it was interesting in this case that they put two lawyers on the jury. And that's because I think the defense will be very technical about the fact that the underlying felony has not been charged, that it's not a campaign finance violation, or that it could be interpreted in different ways. So the fact that they have a jury seated, and this is the first case widely recognized as being the weakest of the 4 pending criminal cases against Donald Trump, will be interesting to see what happens. It could certainly provide a lot of momentum if he's acquitted to the campaign, and it could also be very devastating if he's convicted.
So the best case scenario from Trump's point of view is that that's it, it's dropped, he wins. Would he get his legal costs back?
No, not likely. And of course, it seems as though his campaign is paying the legal costs. That seems to be who's funding all of these cases. I mean, his legal costs are millions and millions of dollars. And you can't really get your legal costs back for any criminal prosecution unless you can show bad faith on the part of the prosecutor, because prosecutors enjoy sovereign immunity from being prosecuted every time they have an acquittal. They can't then get, the person who's acquitted cannot get money back. So I think they're sheltered. However, leave it to Donald Trump to file a lawsuit against the prosecutor if he is acquitted. He's a very aggressive litigant.
And the worst case scenario for Donald Trump?
The worst case scenario is that he's convicted and that he gets jail time, because the maximum sentence for this particular crime is up to 4 years in jail. Now, he's a first offender. He's, in his late 70s. Do I think he'll go to jail? Not in a million years. But I still think that that's his risk, and not to mention the damage to his reputation. Right now, he's able to kind of ride this into momentum with his campaign. He says at least, that people are on his side because he's being persecuted. So we'll see how that plays out.
Fascinating. Summer Law, thank you for giving us that summary of what is going on in New York, and will play out for what, the next 4 weeks, 5 weeks?
Likely 6 weeks. There's a lot of evidence and a lot of witnesses.
Yeah, wow. Summer Law, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
The thought of Trump sitting there through this day after day for 6 weeks, I think he's going to find it very difficult to control himself. I know that I would in such circumstances. And I have to say a lot of this is because of a very highly politicized judicial system in America, and one that is absolutely brutal in every regard. I think they need some pretty wholesale reform of their judicial system. Now, what the Farage? Do you remember this time last year? The Trick Awards, yes, the television and radio industry awards, and it's their club every year, and they have a big lunch. And I urged you on this channel, I kept putting QR codes up on the screen, and we got heavily stuck in. And I was delighted to be awarded News Presenter of the Year. It really was a very, very nice thing to do. I was delighted. I have to say, many of the rest of the industry did not share that joy on the evening. A lot of people booing, etc. But then, I guess, like any industry or any business, people don't like an upstart. People don't like a newcomer. And that's very much the way that GB News was viewed then, and probably still is today. So there is a long list of a couple of dozen names of people who've been put forward again for the News Presenter of the Year category. We have been assured by Trick that it will be a full public vote with no interference whatsoever, provided that the process is run freely and fairly. And what I've got to decide over the course of the next couple of days, because this vote will close on May the 17th, is shall we have another big go? Shall we have another big campaign? It will take up time on this show, because if we're going to do it, we'll do it properly. Love your thoughts, please. Farage@gbnews.com. Tell me what you think. Should we have another really big go, or did we prove our point with this last year? Love to get your thoughts, please, on that. Now, some figures out overnight suggesting a very large increase in the number of people who've been going to the Financial Ombudsman complaining about their bank accounts being frozen, their bank accounts being closed. I'll give you the full details of all of that in just a moment. And, important to say, all of this on the eve of the NatWest Group's AGM, their first AGM since all the traumas the bank went through as a result of their treatment of me. Debanking in just a moment.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Squatters in London have taken over a pub which is leased by Gordon Ramsay, no less. The pub is currently up for sale with a guide price of £30 million. It is understood that Kitchen Nightmares host Ramsay called the police on Wednesday but was unable to have the squatters removed. The Metropolitan Police said in a statement they were made aware of squatters at a disused property but added, "This is a civil matter, and so police did not attend the property." Let's see what my panel make of this. Why can't we just boot squatters out? If we own a property or lease a property, why don't we just boot them out?
I know that's tempting, but the fact is, long-term empty properties have increased by 24% in the last 6 years. There's 1.2 million people on the social housing lists. People don't have a place to live.
What it does highlight is the enormous disparity in fairness in property laws in this country. I mean, it's just not fair that if you've worked all your life and invested some money in property because, you know, interest rates at zero and there's nowhere else to invest your money, and then suddenly somebody who's got no claim to that property and doesn't seem to have earned very much in life takes over your property. It's an outrage.
People shouldn't be squatting in other people's homes or commercial properties. But the fact is, until we sort the housing problem in this country, none of this is going to go away. The fact is, people my age won't be able to buy a home unless they've got a bung from their parents.
Yeah, but what's the practicality of this demonstration?
It's not a demonstration.
It's not going to free up more housing for people who are on the streets.
No, of course not. It's people looking to find a place to live. I don't think it's a demonstration at all.
It's an anti-wealth, anti-property owning demonstration by people who've got nothing better to do in life than break into other people's property.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
It was in July last year when I decided I've got to go public. No longer am I going to keep it under my hat that I've been told by the banking group that I've been with since 1980, both in a personal and indeed business capacity, that my accounts were being closed and that I'd been turned down by 10 other banks. Yes, I was being debanked. I was being made a non-person. And I decided to come out. And the reason I came out was because I was conscious that this was happening for a variety of reasons to a lot of people. Some because they're public figures. They're described as politically exposed persons. Not just them, but in some cases their children or their grandchildren being debanked just for having a relation that was a senior military officer, a judge, or a member of Parliament. But equally, many people were having their accounts closed because of what the banks viewed as unusual payments. You know, you're a company that turns over $5,000 a month. Suddenly, in 1 month, 10 grand comes in. Alarm bells ring at the bank. Are you now the front for some Colombian drug lord? And as a result of really very overzealous, well-intentioned, but overzealous anti-money laundering laws, all of which we got from the European Union, all of which were incorporated into our system, none of which have been questioned by the Financial Conduct Authority or anybody senior in Parliament. Many, many businesses were being debanked. Now, we've had overnight some statistics that have come out which say that complaints to the Financial Ombudsman about being debanked have increased by 44% over the course of the last year. Well, all I can say to that is good, because I hope that my coming out over debanking has encouraged other people to say we're just not going to put up with this. But the important point to note is these are just companies. Now, Harriet Baldwin, who's chair of the Treasury Committee, she said, when we set out our inquiry into financing for small and medium-sized businesses, we weren't necessarily expecting debanking to emerge as a key issue. And what Harriet's committee found was that 140,000 businesses last year were closed down by their banks. Now, I've no doubt some of them were wrong uns. Some of them were money laundering or doing terrible things. But that would have been a very, very small minority. So a lot of this is still going on. More people are complaining, but what the figures don't tell us is how many people have been to the Ombudsman as a result of their personal bank accounts being closed. This issue of debanking, in fact, the very phrase debanking is now in the Oxford English Dictionary. It'll be my one claim to fame after I've gone. It's a word in the language that wasn't there before. But how much damage is all of this doing to business, because I suspect even getting a bank account open has become a very, very tricky business. I'm joined down the line by Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Dr. Jamie White. Jamie, welcome to the programme. Were you shocked? Probably not, to see a 44% increase in 1 year of companies complaining to the Ombudsman.
Well, I'm not shocked, because the number of accounts that are being closed by banks has also increased dramatically over recent years. And as you say, it's in response to legislation that's been brought in actually successively since the early 90s. There's been a succession of anti-money laundering regulations, which place an obligation on banks to effectively act as the police. So the banks have a legal duty to prevent money laundering from occurring. And if the government deems them to have failed in administering that duty, even if no actual money laundering has been detected, just they don't think they're doing a good enough job with their processes and all that kind of thing, they get fined, the banks get fined billions. I mean, there was a fine of, I can't remember which bank it was now, but not long ago, 2023, of 4.5 billion. There have been fines as large as 9 billion. The threat is real.
Yeah, the threat is real, so it's easier, isn't it, just to close the account rather than go through the sheer costs of compliance. Just close the account. You know, it's bad legislation, Jamie. I'd very much hope with Brexit it would be a chance to revisit this very onerous legislation. I've seen nothing done on this at all.
So the banks are acting rationally. So what they do is they go, well, you look like a risk. Perhaps because you're depositing too much cash. We don't like the look of the cash.
Yeah.
Should we look into you and see if you really are a money launderer, or should we just close your account? Well, looking into it is very expensive. And most people's accounts, small business accounts, don't make banks very much money. So if they close the account, that is the rational thing for them to do from an economic point of view. And so the government hasn't thought this through. It's having an unintended consequence of closing. I think last year it was in 2022, it was 180,000 accounts for this reason. And what they need to do is lighten the burden on banks, and then this would stop happening. The banks have no natural interest in closing people's accounts. They don't want to do it. By the way, just to make a clarify a point that you made, of course, some people are doing money laundering. They are wrong-uns, as you put it.
No, I get it.
But the ratio is minute. It's there were 1,000 convictions for money laundering in Britain in 2022, and 180,000 counts are closed on suspicion. So what's effectively happening here is that innocent people are being punished because of the economic incentives that the regulation has created for the banks. And just one more statistic that your viewers may not know, which I think they'll find shocking. The cost of complying with money laundering regulations for banks has been estimated by LexisNexis, which is a kind of law consulting firm, and Oxford Economics, at being $34 billion a year. Well, to put that in context, the total cost of policing in Britain, for all other crimes put together, is $17 billion. So Britain spends twice as much on trying to prevent money laundering as it does on all other crimes put together.
Absolutely bonkers. Jamie White, thank you for joining us with that knockout statistic. Now, tomorrow, it's the annual general meeting of NatWest Group. Yes, it's their first AGM since I perhaps caused them some difficulties. No, not true. They caused themselves those difficulties. I did nothing wrong whatsoever. They debanked me because my views did not align with those of the bank. They then palmed it all off onto a city law firm, Travis Smith, to do an investigation. Now, the reason I won that case and got public sympathy was I put in a subject access request to get the information about me the bank held. Well, I've done a similar subject access request to the legal firm who conducted the inquiry, Travis Smith. And guess what? I've got 139 pages of documents back, and all they are copies of press articles. No information or debate that took place between NatWest and Travis Smith has been released to me at all. Travis Smith are claiming this is privileged information. That is a load of baloney, because this is not a legal... It wasn't a legal responsibility Travis Smith had. It was an investigation into NatWest and how and why they made the decision. The whole thing is a whitewash. And if they think they're going to have this big AGM tomorrow and announce they're going to sell shares to the public in NatWest, a bit like sort of British gas privatisation 40 years ago, and we're all going to pile in and buy NatWest shares. No! They are still being openly and brazenly dishonest. They could have told Travis Smith to tell me the full facts of what was discussed between them. They haven't done so. I'm pretty blooming angry still. Better calm down, Jacob Rees-Moggs in the studio.
Yes.
Well, would you buy shares in NatWest at the moment?
It depends on the price. But their behaviour towards you is so outrageous.
And continuing.
And there's wokeness that has infected British industry. British industry is there to make money. It's not there to express its political views and to get promoted for being woke. It's there to lend money on margin to make a profit for its shareholders. It's a very simple job, really. It's not there to say, well, we don't like Nigel Farage or we don't like anybody else for that matter.
I know. Well, we'll see how
you have revealed this terrible practice, and they're not the only ones doing it.
Massive problem, and we're finding it, across business and individuals too. Parliamentary ping-pong, Jacob Rees-Mogg up voting all night, perhaps?
Well, possibly. I went to sit in the House of Lords for a few minutes just to see what they were saying. And it's always very civilised in the Lords, as you know. I think there will be one difficult vote for the government, but a number of peers are peeling off and saying, look, ultimately the House of Commons must win.
It'll be done.
So it'll be done. It'll be done today. Whether it's early or late, I'm not sure.
And a quick thought, if I may. Sunak today was tougher on this than he'd ever been. No foreign court will stop these planes from going. Does an early general election look slightly more likely today than it did yesterday?
I think it does. I have no inside information, but all the mood music is that they want to get on with it, I think.
Yeah. You see, Jacob, sensible chap, agrees with me. Everybody else disagrees. But there we are. Either we're right or we're very, very wrong. I don't know. I'm back with you tomorrow night, live at 7 o'clock.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Looking ahead to tomorrow, it's going to be a much drier and sunnier day for many of us, but there will be some rain, particularly across the southeast. That's due to this weather front that's still making its way southwards. Much of the rain will tend to fade away throughout this evening, but there'll be a real legacy of cloud left behind. So quite a murky evening for central areas of England, parts of Wales, the south coast as well. We can see some drizzly rain for a time this evening. There's also a risk of some fog developing across parts of northeastern England through tonight. Further north and west, though, it will be much drier and clearer tonight. It's going to be quite a cold start tomorrow, but frost will be fairly limited to just some Scottish glens and perhaps the far southeast of England as well. So a chillier start to the day, but definitely a brighter start to the day for Northern Ireland, much of Scotland, Northern England as well. Across many western areas of Wales and southwest England as well, it should be a fairly dry and bright day. But sunshine will be a little bit more limited across the south coast, where there'll be some drizzly rain on and off through the day across the southeast. But it won't feel too bad in the sunshine if you're sheltered from that northerly wind. It's going to be a cold start on Wednesday, though. There's a greater risk of seeing a frost, generally, though, still in rural areas. We've got more of a northeasterly wind developing on Wednesday. That will bring in a few showers across the east coast, but in the west, it's going to be another fairly dry, bright and warm-feeling day in the sunshine. Looking ahead to the rest of the week, well, still some chilly nights to come, and it looks like it will turn a little bit more unsettled from Friday.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you could win our biggest prize yet. There's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. Hurry, as lines close on Friday. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new. The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go. How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News.